So we're going to go ahead and start. So here's the question. Now, what is the subject in school that you had the hardest time with? Science. He started smiling. What's he smiling about?
You asked.
Well, anyway, so you said science. Anybody else? Science? So science. D, all the above? Is that what you were smiling about? Or? Okay. But you didn't do your work. Okay. Well, you would probably struggle with it. Okay. Well, it's kind of frustrating to study for something and just study, and still not get the grade that you're looking for. I mean, there's some things that we're just not good at, things we can't do. We're up to chapter 40. So there's been a lot of speeches by Job and his friends, and everybody's been basically giving their knowledge or what they think is their knowledge, and God's been listening. And it's starting in chapter 38. He responds, and the thing about Job is he's missed something crucial about God, and God responds to him starting in chapter 38. And I've passed out a few verses, more than a few verses, but a few verses on Job. Don't make me laugh. So we're just gonna, if you got a verse for Job, just read it. And this is some of the questions that he asked him a whole bunch of questions. Some of the questions he asked Job, because Job was, they've all been responding.
What is the way to the place where the light is disturbed? Can you send forth and say to you, here we are?
38:4. Where were you? Tell me if you have understanding. And then I have you entered the storehouse? Have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle?
Job 38:19 and 20 says, where is the way to the dwelling of light, and where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, that you may discern the path to its home?
I have 38:41. Who provides for the raven its prey when it's young? For 38:36. Who has put wisdom in the inner parts, and given understanding to the mind?
You didn't have any grade. Okay. So these questions were given to Job to help him understand. They were meant to help him realize that God's infinitely more wiser, more powerful. He's asking him questions that obviously none of us can answer. And he was trying to get Job's attention. Looking at the board, she graciously wrote it where you can read it. We got some academic diplomas, professional license, certifications, security clearance, password, badge. What are some of what do these words might have in common?
Recognition.
Okay, recognition. Credential. It's a forms of credentials. They provide, when they're speaking on something, it's about privilege. Somebody read on page 55 First Thoughts. the whole thing.
Things would be different if we were in charge. We may have pride when a sibling got what we thought to be better treatment, as we called into question the fairness of mom and dad. Yes, that's true. They may have were parents, but that for right now, they were the parents and we were not. We may even accuse God of being unfair because of life situations. Job raised this issue, and God responded by reminding Job of his credentials.
Okay, so what credentials might a person need to be in charge of a family?
I said to be in charge, you need to be able to lead those you're in charge of in the right way.
Okay.
I don't feel like you should be in charge.
Okay. We're going to leave it at that. How would you describe God's credentials?
Going back to what Marty said, lead us.
As we just read, pretty impressive resume, so I don't think we need to question. So in the past few weeks, we've seen Job continuously question God on why he was allowing his dire circumstances. So last week, his friend, I called him Elihu, Job with inflated pride and self-righteousness. Today we're going to watch as God answers Job directly. Credentials. We've read the verses, so we know everything we see, everything we know was put in place and is maintained and sustained by God. So somebody read verses 1 through 5.
The Lord answered Job, "Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who argues with God give an answer." And Job answered the Lord, "I am so insufficient. How can I answer you? I place my hand over my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not reply." But
Okay. So, question is, why are people prone to question God's justice and fairness? Okay. One of the things we always have to remember, we were created, and He is the creator. We were made in His image, not the other way. We believe God should act the way we think He should. I mean, or the way we would. But He reveals Himself to us in a way that we can understand. And there's there's a whole lot more to God than what we can actually see. Knowing that Job planned to confront him, God's going to set him straight. So one of the ways He revealed Himself as Almighty, and to humble Him. One of the things correctly is that the way that's translated from is Shaddai. Does anybody know Shaddai? That's what I thought, but probably should have did a little bit more. Well, that's that's kind of where I was going from. Does anybody know what that means? Or what it?
It's one of the names of God.
Okay. I mean, God can't be stopped. His plans can't be stopped. His whatever He set in motion, that's what's going to happen. Thinking he was going to set God straight, in fact, Job was the one that gets put in line. And of course, it says, I think my book read that he said he was small and insignificant. Or am I jumping ahead? Either way, Job realizes his ignorance. And so he covers his mouth and he remains silent. Contending with God and asking Him honest and respectful questions. Who's got Psalm 77, 7 through 9?
I do.
You do. Okay.
Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has His steadfast love Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Selah.
So he was asking some questions. Who's got a bag of, I can't say it. Somebody say it. A bag. Yeah, there we go.
O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? O cry to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise.
Okay. So they're crying out to God. One of the things of seeing God as infinitely more wise and powerful than us should give us a higher view of God, but it also should do what? It should humble us to the point where we realize who we're talking to. Why should we be careful not to criticize or make presumptions about God's work in our lives? Okay.
We're not wisdom.
Okay.
God is wisdom, which kind of confused me because Job knew this. He's already discussed this. I guess he just has to point out.
Pity party. Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of this whole thing is that they've been through all this stuff, and now God's like, okay, so this is how you don't seem to be understanding. But some of the things we got, I think what you're talking about is we just don't have the knowledge or wisdom to know everything, and God knows everything. He's put everything in motion, as we talked about, and we don't have the perspective to judge our circumstances or what we're doing. But there's also a verse that can kind of clear some of that up. Who's got Ecclesiastes 7:14?
In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other. Be after him.
Okay. So God says we're going to experience good and bad times. So that in itself is a verse that we can keep in mind when we're going through some struggles. But we also have to keep these. One of the things I was thinking about this week, in Sunday school, we talk about what is your praise for God? And a lot of times the room falls silent, and we tend not to say or remember what's happened. We can remember bad things that happen to us. We can remember the struggles that we go through, but we tend to always, not always, no, let me say that, but we tend to sometimes fall short when we're writing down, and we've talked about this before, about writing down the things that God has worked in your life. Some things are long, some things are real short. So this week, I've been, for the last, 3 weeks or so, I've been struggling a great deal with my hip. My hip has been giving me quite a fit, and I was getting to the point where I couldn't hardly walk. I thought I was going to have to come and borrow Joey's cane, because one night I sat down and I was really hobbling and I was going along. And, the other night I got down to pray, and I prayed for God to take that pain away, to heal me. And that is not something that I typically do. But I was getting, it wasn't the worst pain in the world, but if anybody, as you should know, when you're trying to walk around and it's just this sharp pain shooting. Well, anyways, long story short, I got up the next morning and it was gone. So I would like to say that is one of the things that I'm trying to work hard on in my life is to write down the good, not just the bad, because we can remember those bad things, those moments in life that hurt us deeply, but we tend to write off the good things as things that happen, Okay, somebody read chapter 40, verse 6 through 9.
And the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. Would you really challenge my justice? Would you declare me guilty to justify yourself? Do you have an arm like God's? Can you thunder with a voice like His?
If these verses don't make you shiver a little bit, something wrong. So, Job has repeatedly demanded a hearing. What is one of the themes of his friends as we went through this? What have they said to him?
You've done something wrong.
You've done something. There's something you've done, Job. You hiding it. You're not telling us. And he keeps saying, I haven't done anything. You know, he's continually said, he thinks I want a hearing before God, and God's going to basically set everybody straight and let them know that Job hadn't done anything. He assumed that God had an indictment against him, and he wanted to get things. So God responds by demanding answers from Job. And page 60 in your book, it says, how does God confront people today who question him? And how does that compare to the way he confronted Job? So there's some examples in the Bible of how God communicated, and we've got some verses. Moses in Exodus 3. Who's got Exodus 3? Mr. Haddon. If you will read verses 1 through 4 in Exodus 3.
Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, while the bush is not burned. Yeah, one more. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am.
Okay. So there's one example. God talked to Moses through a bush, a burning bush, not just a bush, a burning bush. Gideon received a message through a fleece. We got verses, chapter 6, verses 37 through 40 in Judges.
Behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. When he rose early next morning and squeezed the fleece, he wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. And Gideon said to God, let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground there was dew.
Pretty cool.
So make sure you didn't sweat on that, please.
You make sure you didn't sweat on the fleece.
Like, I believe you, but I need one.
I need one.
to make
It
sure.
might have been a hot night. I might have been sweating.
How many times have we done that though? I mean, how many times has God answered you, and then you say, confirm it a little bit more. So, and then of course, which we didn't cover these verses, but I think it's verse 3 in Job 38, or somewhere around those first few verses. God answers Job out of a whirlwind, or tornado, or whatever, however you want to put it. So what ways does he communicate with us? So somebody has Hebrews 1 through 3.
Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the sins. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high.
What's the one thing that we can always remember about Job that Job didn't have that we have? Well, there's a couple, but let's just keep going. What's the other one? He didn't have a Bible. He had nothing to go on And so this communication was kind of necessary for him in that sense. But in our sense, we have Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the Word of God. And through that, that's how we're led. And I mean, it is hard sometimes to talk to people when they ask you certain things about how does God talk to you, you know, and then they doubt you and whatever. But you know, you can feel it, you can tell. So page 61 is how is questioning God's justice the same as placing oneself as equal to or greater than God?
Are you sure you meant that? Sure that's what you meant?
Okay.
Like, I don't think you're right. Are you sure that's what you told me that and not him?
I've done
That's
that.
the way I would do it.
That's not the way I do it. Well, nobody would do it the way you do it, but okay, let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. So why is questioning God's omnipotence evidence of a limited or diminished perspective? So putting ourselves in a situation where we question God, we put ourselves on the same level as God and think that we know the same things He does. And going back again to the verses that we read at the beginning, we don't know where the light comes from, where it goes, where the darkness goes, how he set the sea where it was at and stopped it from coming and going. I mean, if you sat on the beach every day and watched the water come in, Margie, don't go to the beach yet. She's already gone. So here we go. We lost one. But if you sit on the beach and just watch the waves come in, and then they go back out, and you watch the moon. I mean, Sally loves the
I'm a
moon.
moon freak.
She loves the moon.
I love all the different phases of the moon, and I sit there and I go, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And then I have a picture on my phone right now that has the sun and the moon in it at one time, and I'm like, how do you do that? You know, no person can do that.
Right.
I don't know.
So we
It's pretty
just
amazing.
like Job, we're quick to blame God when something goes wrong, or some people rather are. A lot of times, again, I reference social media a lot. If you read the comments in social media, people tend to use God in ways that's just really wrong, really bad. And a lot of people, especially non-believers, want to blame God for anything and everything that happens that it wasn't right. How can a God of love do this or this or this? And of course, we know that God has a plan. The thing about God is He's up here and we're down here. Who's got Isaiah 64:6?
We have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment. We all fade like a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind take us away.
So who we are in comparison to God is like a polluted garment. By questioning God's justice, Job failed to recognize God's greater purpose in his suffering. And that's a lot of times, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. We're always looking through that little peephole of what's going on, and God's got everything in front of him. He knows exactly where He's taking us and what He's doing. What are some practical ways that we can remember God's character so we avoid Job's error in questioning God?
Well, I think when you have a personal relationship, you kind of, the more you talk with God, you realize, like if we look at how Gideon came to God and how Job came to God, it's two different ways. Like Gideon asked, can I test you again? Job's just like, why'd you do this? I think the more your relationship grows and the closer you come to God, the more you realize how insignificant you are, but how much you need Him and how much He can do for you.
Okay. So by reflecting on God's character, it can deepen our understanding
We can gain wisdom.
Fortunately for us, we have a whole bunch of scripture to read, and that we can read that, and we can. The more we stay in God's word, the more that we can communicate, as Margie was talking about, and it helps us with it deepen our understanding. One thing, time's going to come when we're not going to understand what's going on. God's not going to tell us why it's going on, and we may never know. And we've talked about this in the earlier weeks with Job and everything that was going on with him. He never really finds out why. And there's going to be times in our lives when things happen that we're not going to understand, but we should, as Margie was just saying, we should ask for wisdom, and we should continue to pray, and we should be obedient. Okay, we got verses 10 through 14.
Adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and clothe yourself with honor and glory. Pour out your raging anger. Look on every proud person and humiliate him. Look on every proud person and humble him. Trample the wicked where they stand. Hide them together in the dust. Imprison them in the grave. Then I will confess to you that your own right hand can deliver you.
Okay. I think it was last week. I mean, how many times have we looked at somebody else and made judgment? And God's challenging Job here to act as God. He's saying, hey, tell me these things. Tell me what you want, and he said, if you can do this, then you can save yourself. I think it was last week. Y'all, I can't remember anything, so I think it was. But we were just discussing how we pass judgment on things that we really don't even understand. So based on these verses, what did God want Job to realize about his own limitations?
Until he's able to do all those things that God can, then he has no right.
In modern day terms, shut up and listen. You don't have a right to question me. You can't do any of these things that I just asked you to do. I want you to go back to where we were at. We asked for wisdom, discernment, and continue to pray. These are some heavy things that God went in chapter 38 and going through the things that he asked him were, talking about the moon and the sea and all these things that we take for granted a lot of times. When you actually sit down and think about how the world works, I mean, we don't even know. I mean, we have a limited understanding of how these things are placed. But then when you listen to how scientists talk about if things are off just a little bit, what would happen? So God created, he sustains the whole world. He's always at work in our lives, whether we realize it or not. Sometimes we think he's left me. He's put me out. I've done too much or something. Something's went wrong and he's not here anymore. And that's when you get that alone feeling. When you're sitting there and you feel like you're the only person in the world that don't know. And he's still there. He's still working, and that's we only aware of a few things that he's doing in our lives. He's always so the question is, now that we know all this, how should God's wisdom and power impact our daily lives? One of the things that we always got to do is think about our daily walk and where we're at and what we're doing. So what does it do for us that we understand, or is
It should guide our decisions,
okay?
even the smallest decisions. Right? I mean, I know something you wear shouldn't be a big deal, but
It could
Something
be.
you wear is a big
It
deal
should be.
if it doesn't reflect
right.
what God wants you to reflect.
Right, and so even something that, as we would think,
Insignificant.
yes, we should even, maybe I should.
So it frees us from self-reliance. A lot of times we get wrapped up in the moment in time when we feel like